The United States is changing. You can see it right before your eyes when you watch a commercial like that, Coca-Cola, one we just saw. The streets are becoming more ethnically diverse. Baby boomers are retiring by the tens of thousands every day. And millennials struggle to keep up with the milestones that their parents' generation set. But how are these changes affecting our day-to-day life? Paul Taylor from Pew Research Center took a look at the changing demographics and what we can expect with these changes in the United States. He joins us now from Washington. Well, welcome to the program. I know that the United States and Canada have some demographic differences, but I'd like to look at American stats because how America goes, often Canada follows. Tell me what your findings are about how the different groups, the silent generation, the boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials, how are they faring, let's say, economically compared to each other?
Pretty dramatic story. Our oldest generation, the so-called silents, and they're in their 70s and 80s, are doing the best of any generation. We and others ask a survey question every year, what is your biggest financial worry? For adults of all ages, the #1 financial worry is I'm not going to have enough money to retire on. The only generation that doesn't feel that way are those who are already retired, the older folks. They had a pretty good run throughout most of their working lives, and they benefit from the two greatest domestic policy programs this country enacted in the 20th century, Social Security and Medicare. Without them, nearly 50% of our seniors would be poor. Because of them, only about 10 or 12% are poor. They are the most well-off group economically in our country. Conversely, the least well-off group are our young adults, the so-called millennials and their children. There, the poverty rates have gone way up over the last several decades.
You know what? I know that's similar in Canada, too. I mean, seniors, their main asset is their house. The mortgage is paid off, and property rates have risen. It's not just poverty. It's can they even get a job? We got on this screen right now a chart from your work that shows that millennials, when they're between ages 25 and 43, have an average unemployment rate of 8.2%, whereas my generation, the Generation X, when we were that age on average, we had a 5.8% unemployment rate. And so it's not just that seniors are doing better now than other groups are. It's just that when we were moving up the ladder of life, maybe things were better. Do you study why this happens, or you just make observations of what is happening?
Well, the why is a very big story, probably above my pay grade. The two leading suspects on the why are the globalization of labor markets and technology. That is, over time, technology usually creates more jobs than it destroys. We're in the middle of the first few decades of the digital revolution and now the robotic revolution. It has clearly destroyed a lot of jobs that used to be available for people at the lower end of the educational and socioeconomic scale. So if you think about today's 25, 30, 35-year-olds, timing has a lot to do with it. They entered the workforce just as our housing market, our stock market, our economy went into collapse in the mid-aughts. Many of them have not recovered from that, and you point out the high unemployment rates. But you can look at every other indicator, whether it's wealth, whether it's average income, whether it's debt. A lot of young adults are emerging from schooling with unprecedented levels of debt. So this generation in the United States of young adults is the first in modern history, and probably the first in our history, that across every economic indicator you can measure is doing less well at this stage of life than its parents and grandparents were back when they were the same age.
Wow, but I want to show one chart we have of the percentage of people in different age groups who are optimistic that they'll have a pension when they retire. That's what's interesting to me, is that the millennials, I think, are the most self-deceiving. The question was, are you sure you'll have enough? Are you unsure you'll have enough for retirement? Only 35% millennials are even worried or care about that compared to 44% in my generation. Now, the silent generation, only 28% are worried, and they have no need to be worried because they are getting their pension. But I want to show one more chart, and then I'll ask you to speak about it. Let's look at the tree, the demographic tree, so to speak, that shows how many young people there are compared to older folks. In 1960, the tree was basically pyramid-shaped. There were tons of young people coming up to carry the weight of those elders. Now it's basically, almost rectangular. That's really the math here. We can't sustain these entitlements. Am I right?
Well, you are right, and this is uncharted waters throughout human history. It's always in every society in human history until now, whenever you broke the age groups down in that way, showing each horizontal bar and what share of the population is represented by each 5-year cohort, it's always been a pyramid. By the middle of this century, as you say, in this country, but also in Canada, also throughout most of Western Europe and the wealthy countries of East Asia, it will be a rectangle. This puts enormous stress because at the end of the day, old people need the vitality of young people to support them, increasingly through public social safety nets where the math simply doesn't work. To go back to your first question about why are these kids who are facing such hard times, why are they so optimistic about the future? You know, some of this is simply the invincibility of youth. If it's a life cycle effect, if you look at middle-aged folks today, they're more worried about their financial futures. But if you track how they felt back when they were in their 20s, they had the same sense, it's all going to work out. Optimism is pretty hardwired into the American national character. There's a little less than there used to be. We track these sorts of things all the time. But it's still there, and it's still there among the young, and that's probably a good thing because optimism can get you through some long nights.
That's great. Paul Taylor of the Pew Research Center, thanks very much for joining us today.